بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم صل على سيدنا ونبينا ومولانا محمد وبارك وسلم. Today, inshallah, we will begin the discussion on adab, and it's a long discussion. We must first of all understand that the role of Taṣawwuf is to correct, improve, and then refine the life of a Muslim in all phases of his life. So if we start at the very bottom, the level of good manners, ethics, behavior, etc., then Tasawwuf will come first and foremost to correct the ethics and moral behavior of a person who's seeking the path, the salik. So this person will have to mend and improve and then refine his relationships with his parents, with his siblings, with his spouse, with his relatives, with the community, with everyone that he comes into contact with. And those must be, first of all, understood as being part of Sharia. And secondly, it must be that we're following the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ in our moral behavior. So these are the prerequisites to entering the city of Tasawwuf and engaging in one's path towards Jannah and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So some of these ethics and moral values are understandable, they're very apparent, like not lying and speaking the truth, and being honest and not being dishonest, and being trustworthy and not being untrustworthy, etc. These are obvious, and it is part of Islam that Muslims make sure that every other Muslim is respected, honored, and there is no harm that comes to another Muslim from our behavior. But there are some other moral values that the people of Tasawwuf speak of, and they are there, but they are a bit more subtle than perhaps the other obvious moral values, such as pride or arrogance, and other vices like greed and cowardice and stinginess. So there, the role of the Sufi master will be to help the salik develop in order to improve himself, herself, and rid themselves of these vices so that they are in line with the mirror of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, so that they understand that being arrogant is not a good thing, having pride is not a good thing, and being greedy is not a good thing, and being impatient is not a good thing, etc. So the role of Tasawwuf here will be to, first of all, correct and then improve, and then later on, refine. It is in this refinement that we find the chapter of Adab here in Imam Qushayri's book in front of us, his Risālah, so to speak. So in the process of refinement, we go into the Quran, we go into the hadith and the Sunnah and the statements of the Sahaba and the awliya who came after them, and we find that there's a colossal amount of richness and a colossal amount of inspiration that is in these people. A person by the name of Abu Talib Makki, rahimahullah, who was also a great scholar, wrote a book by the name of Qutul Qulub, which is the nourishment of hearts. This book is supposed to be the prototype upon which Imam Ghazali later on wrote his Ihya Ulumuddin. Abu Talib Makki preceded him, and Imam Ghazali then copied at least some of the format of his book. So in this book, Qutul Qulub, Abu Talib Makki, rahimahullah, discusses all of these ethics and moral values from the level of correcting what needs to be corrected, improving what needs to be improved, and refining what needs to be refined. So all the refined akhlaq, ethics and morals are found in the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, in the Quran, in the Sunnah, where they become the standard for human perfection. And this is where the story of adab begins. Along with your dealings with other people, we have a huge chapter in also what we call earning a living. Okay, so everybody, mashallah, earns a living. So in this chapter of earning a living, we must first of all correct ourselves as to how we earn a living and whether the means we use are halal or not. And if they are not, then they have to be corrected. And then they have to be improved. And then they have to be refined. Somebody asked the great faqih, Abu Hanifa's student, Mohammed ibn Hassan al-Shaybani, rahimahullah, and said, why don't you write a book on zuhud and asceticism so that we can draw closer to Allah? So Imam Muhammad, as he is known, said, I already have written a book on that, and it is called Kitabul Buyu', the book of transactions, signifying that if you know how to earn your living correctly, according to the principles of Islamic law and Sharia law, and understanding how Islamic finance works, etc., then you will develop within yourself a sense of zuhud, a sense of taqwa that will draw you closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, much more than perhaps you read in a book on zuhud. That was during his time, where the scholars had a tremendous refinement in how they earned a living. A story comes to mind where Imam Muhammad's teacher, Imam al-Azam Abu Hanifa, rahimahullah, had borrowed some money from someone. Later on in the week, he was going towards that person's shop, and it was midday, and the sun was screeching down. It was very, very hot. One of his students pulled him into the shade of the shop of the person who lent him money. Abu Hanifa stepped outside the shade and said, no. He said, this person has lent me money. If I stand underneath the shade of his shop, this will be somewhat akin to riba, that I'll be gaining from his loan, and we don't gain anything additional from a loan. So this is the height of zuhud, asceticism, and the height of taqwa. This is where now adab in your mu'amalat, adab in your transactions come in. And the purpose of the Sufi master is to train the salik and those who are seekers to correct, and then to improve, reform, and then to refine all of their dealings when it comes to their business and their transactions and so on. Likewise, you go then further into a person's ibadat. So the role of the Sufi master, person who is now entrenched in Taṣawwuf, will be to correct the ibadat of the people who are coming into the path first, that they must know the mechanics of wudu and salat, and the mechanics of sawm and zakat and hajj correctly, legally, and then at the same time improve their focus, concentration, and then at the end refine their focus and concentration. So this is what the role of the Sufi will be in terms of adab. Okay. Then you go further into aqaid, you go further into your beliefs, understanding who Allah is, recognizing who Allah is, and having a relationship with the Creator that is corrected, that is improved, and that is refined. And then later on, if you are talibul ilm, a student of knowledge, then you have the same methodology. You first of all need to correct yourself, your intentions, your methodology, how you behave with your books, how you behave with the classroom, how you behave with the teacher, and how you behave with the institution, and how you behave with knowledge in general. And then you must improve on that. And then later on, it will be to the height of refinement, where you see the stories of the people in the past, that they had such great adab for their teachers that it is mind-boggling that we still hear of those stories, but which is kind of might seem very far-fetched for us today, because they're simply out of this world. Okay? So Abdullah ibn Abbas, radiallahu anhuma, for instance, had students, and if he was inside his tent, the students would not announce that they're waiting outside. And sometimes they would wait for hours outside the tent until Ibn Abbas would come out, and then Ibn Abbas would say, "Why have you been waiting here for so long? You should have just told me you're here. I would have come out." And they said, "No, this is against the adab." So this is now adab in terms of learning your deen, understanding your deen, and adab at this level now becomes refinement and pure. Okay? So in this chapter, Kitab al-Adab, adab is where you start, and adab is where you finish. Okay? So Imam Qushayri rahimahullah knows this, and he has introduced to us certain hadith, and that shows the depth of his knowledge, and shows us that he is well in tune with all the other aspects of Sharia and aqaid and kalam. And then on top of that, at the top of the peak of the mountain, he is now discussing the role of the Sufi master and the role of someone who's in Taṣawwuf. You cannot be in Taṣawwuf, or you cannot claim to be in Taṣawwuf if you are engaging in haram. That is a no-no. So it doesn't matter how many tasbih, misbah, and all of these rosaries, beads you break while you do dhikr. If you engage in haram, you're not on the path of Islam, never mind being on the path of tasawwuf and suluk and towards Jannah and towards Allah. So that's a no-brainer. So Muslims must appreciate that as much as there is intellectual entertainment with the works and the words of Sufis, people get excited when they hear that a certain person who knows the Tasawwuf is coming and he's speaking and he's going to give a lecture, and they go there just for intellectual entertainment. It's like having your favorite ice cream, and you go there and you enjoy the ice cream, and that's the end of it. That's not Tasawwuf. Tasawwuf is built on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's sharia, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam's behavior. Then on top of that, you have refinement. When you are ready for that refinement, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will open the doors for you, and there'll be no limit to how much you can seek and how much you can learn. Imam Qushayri rahimahullah discusses this Kitab al-Adab. We will start reading, first of all, one ayah of the Quran and discuss it, and then one or two hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as Imam Qushayri always has a reason for bringing those ayat and bringing those hadith. So this is Kitab or Bab al-Adab, the chapter of Adab. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قال المصنف رحمه الله نفع الله بعلومه في الدارين آمين. قال الله عز وجل ما زاغ البصر وما طغى. There's an ayah in Surah Al-Najm. قيل حفظ آداب الحضرة. Imam Qushayri, although he's a great alim and mufassir himself, he doesn't want to show people that this is his interpretation. So he gives an interpretation that is mentioned in the books of tafsir. So in one of the books of tafsir, the tafsir of this ayah, مَا زَاغَ الْبَصَرُ وَمَا طَغَى, just a quick background, at the night, at the time when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam on his night journey in Mi'raj was going towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and as he was moving towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he did not falter, and he was not distracted by any of the side attractions that were definitely there. Okay, so his eyesight did not lose focus and purpose, and he was not astray at all in his quest to seek Allah, Allah's nur, and be with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Meaning, on the road to knowledge, there are always going to be many side attractions which students of knowledge know. Right? Not even, not just knowledge of Deen and Islam and the Quran, Hadith, but even worldly, secular knowledge. As you know, if you go on campus or you go to a college, university, there are just so many distractions. Okay. People lose focus. Some people make it, some people don't make it. Likewise, in any madrasa, if you go, there are going to be many side attractions that become distractions, and so on and so forth. You want to read this book and you want to read that book. A certain scholar comes to town. I want to seek knowledge and I must go to seek knowledge wherever it is. Therefore, I'm going to leave the madrasa. I'm not going to take permission from anybody. I'm going to go because I'm seeking knowledge. These are distractions. Okay? That is against the adab of seeking knowledge, which is the reason why Imam Qushayri brings this ayah to the attention of the scholars. That scholars, when you are seeking knowledge, then remain focused, as your Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was so focused on the night of Mi'raj, at the time when he was in at Mi'raj, that he was not disturbed or distracted by the attractions on the side. There were rows and rows of angels. There were other spectacles in front of the divine presence. And there was just so much there that the Prophet ﷺ could have been distracted by. But he did not falter. He stayed and remained focused, which shows the dexterity of the Prophet ﷺ. It shows his himmah, his determination. It shows his integrity, that he is there only because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is calling him, and he's the only reason why he's making this journey. So we see that in terms of appreciating the depth of this ayah for the student of knowledge, and we are always students of knowledge. We never graduate. Okay? That's just the myth that you have this degree or that degree. No one graduates from knowledge, as with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam's dua, وَقُلْ رَبِّ زِدْنِي عِلْمًا, and say, my Lord, increase me in knowledge. You're always a student of knowledge, even at the time when you die. So no one must assume that they are somewhat independent of learning at any given point of time in their lives. You always learn, and you should always learn. The point is that the ayah speaks about a certain adab, a certain refinement in terms of seeking divine pleasure and seeking Allah himself. So when you're seeking Allah himself and you're seeking Allah's pleasure, then you have to make sure that you maintain course and you are not diverted and you don't take a detour, and you stay on line, you stay on track, and you stay on the right path until you reach your destination. That takes determination, that takes courage, that takes steadfastness, and more than that, it takes sabr, patience, and all of the good stuff that comes with seeking knowledge and so on. So the Prophet ﷺ showed the ummah that when you're in the divine presence or you're going towards the divine presence, you must remain focused and you must not be disturbed or distracted by anything else that is out there. And unfortunately, most students of knowledge today, they are very easily distracted. Their attention span is about 30 seconds until they're distracted by something else. And they come back to the book that they're supposed to study with the teacher. And then they have another distraction and they go elsewhere with their imagination and so on and so forth. So that is not the way, that is not adab. That is not the refinement that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants Muslims to understand and also to develop. The Ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam as a civilization showed the world that they are all about ihsan, which is refinement, which is excellence, okay? Which is doing things the best way possible. Inna Allah kataba al-ihsana fi kulli shay. The Prophet ﷺ said, Allah has prescribed and ordained ihsan and excellence in everything. So this ummah as a civilization showed everybody else in the world, themselves first, that they believe in ihsan. And when you look into our great architecture, and you look into our great cuisine, and you look into the great means of hygiene that we maintained and developed, and you look into all the other precise services that we offered to the people, and you look into our libas and our clothing and our garments and everything else, and our industries and crafts, everything else, you will see that there's a certain amount of refinement that came because we are followers of the Prophet ﷺ, who was a master of adab. He was a master of adab. There's all adab with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You know. So anyway, there are so many stories from the Prophet ﷺ's own seerah that show this tremendous adab with Allah and tremendous adab with people. And Imam Qushayri at the end will perhaps refer to a story of the Prophet ﷺ, which we will hopefully read perhaps next week, inshallah. But this ayah, مَا زَاغَ الْبَصَرُ وَمَا طَغَىٰ, that at the time when Allah is choosing, selecting his Habib ﷺ to come to him, and now he's going to endow him with so much knowledge. وَأَوْحَىٰ رَبُّهُ مَا أَوْحَىٰ, that his Lord then gave him whatever he gave him. We don't know. Only Allah and his Rasul know what was exchanged at that time, at that point. But the point Imam Qushayri rahimahullah is bringing, that the Muslim scholars, number one, and the Muslim students of knowledge, number two, and the Muslim ummah, number three, must maintain this level of tahseen, ihsan, adab, refinement, if they are going to be ambassadors of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Yeah. There's another ayah which he brings, قال تعالى قُوا أنفسكم وأهليكم نارا. O you who believe, save and protect yourselves and your family members from the fire of hell. جاء في التفسير عن ابن عباس فقهوهم وأدبوهم, that he mentions a narration from Abdullah ibn Abbas radiyallahu anhuma, who is known as the mufassir of this ummah, that he translated this or made a tafsir of this ayah by saying that give them understanding of deen, وَأَدِّبُوهُمْ, and give them adab, give them refinement in their mannerisms and everything else that they do, that this now protecting yourself from the fire and protecting yourself from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's wrath and protecting your own family members requires that first of all you have knowledge of Sharia, and second you have adab. So that this is how important adab was to the Sahaba, that they understood ayat of the Quran to reflect this meaning, because that's how they were, and that's what they became, and so on. So you can see the focus in the Quran is all about making sure that first of all there is correctness, and second there is improvement, and third that there is refinement, all in that order. And it's a lifelong process. You don't reach the level of refinement overnight. It takes time, and it takes a lot of struggle, a lot of mujahada, a lot of understanding, and maybe sometimes swallowing quite a few bitter pills from your superiors. Yeah. We then go into a hadith that Imam Qushayri rahimahullah brings. أخبرنا علي بن أحمد الأهوازي قال أخبرنا أبو الحسن الصفار البصري قال حدثنا التمام قال حدثنا عبد الصمد بن نعمان قال حدثنا عبد الملك بن حسين عن عبد الملك بن عمير عن مصعب بن شيبة عن عائشة رضي الله عنها عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قال حق الولد على والده أن يحسن اسمه ويحسن مرضعه ويحسن أدبه. Yeah. This is a hadith that is found in one or two books of hadith, where the Prophet ﷺ said that the right of a child for the father is that the father does a good job naming him or her. That the first thing a father must do is must choose a good name. A good name means a name that means something, or a name of a Sahabi, or name of a prophet. Not that it just sounds good. Nowadays, through the internet, you find a word that sounds good, but it means something very awful. That is not the way Muslims do naming of their children. They follow the Sharia, first of all. It must be correct, first and foremost. The aesthetics come after the correctness. So in Islam, we make sure that whatever we do is first and foremost correct, and then it's appealing, not the other way around. That is, first of all, appealing, then we find a way to make it correct. It doesn't work that way. So this is the right and the duty of a father, that when he is naming the child, that the child has a good name. And for that, if he has to struggle or ask a few people, then it's fine. And the Prophet ﷺ mentioned a few good names himself. And then that he must make sure that the person who is taking care of the child is also good. The person who is giving milk to the child is also good, because that will be part of the adab of raising the child properly, and so on. And then at the end, yuhsina adabahu, that the father must make sure that the child has good manners and good adab and ethics and morals and so on. So this is what the Prophet ﷺ said. This hadith is there, and there are some narrations to this effect, and it is found in books like Bayhaqi and other books and so on. But anyway, the issue here, what Imam Qushayri, rahimahullah, is showing to the scholar is that first and foremost, you can see the Prophet ﷺ's emphasis upon a child is not that the child learns the Fatiha or starts to read Salat as soon as he or she is born. The first priority must be that the food must be good, the name must be good, and the behavior must be good. Meaning that teaching people good manners and how to live correctly and properly is now first and foremost in a child's tarbiyah, in a child's development, that this is the way we behave in our homes, with our parents, with our siblings, with everybody else, with the community, with guests, and so on, that the adab must be taught, and it is up to the parents to teach this adab to the children. The children don't develop or inculcate adab themselves. Okay? That's a myth, that you must leave them to be who they are. That's not the way Islam works, and it's against the ayah we just quoted, قُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ وَأَهْلِيكُمْ, protect yourselves and your family from the fire. So you have the responsibility of making sure that the adab and the behavior of every child is in line with, first of all, the Sharia, and then in line with whatever is now a civilizational value. And Muslims always took pride in making sure that others saw them as well behaved and the best behaved and the best mannered, etc., so that they would be leaders for other people. And this goes a long way. Anyway. ويحكى عن سعيد المسيب أنه قال من لم يعرف ما لله عز وجل عليه في نفسه ومن لم يتأدب بأمره ونهيه كان من الأدب في عزله. This is a statement from Sa'id ibn al-Musayyib, rahimahullah. Sa'id ibn al-Musayyib is one of the highest ranking tabi'in. He was there in Medina. He met so many Sahaba of Medina and so of the Khulafa, and he narrated from them. And he was a great scholar. He was such a great scholar that certain Sahaba would tell people in front of them that if they want a fatwa, they must go and sit with Sa'id, don't come to us. Meaning the Sahaba who were with the Prophet ﷺ would say this about Sa'id, that he is such a good alim and a person that if you have a question that is detailed or somewhat technical, then go and sit with Sa'id. He will answer you. We will not answer you. Okay? This is part of the adab of the ummah. This is how our civilization used to be. That we did not say that we are the be-all, end-all, and the only thing that is now good for the ummah. We shared everything that we had, and we participated in a communal learning where you can imagine this is a Sahabi who has been in the company of the Prophet ﷺ, is saying to his students that you go and ask him for the fatwa. I'm not giving you the fatwa. That's amazing adab, that the Sahabi is respecting the knowledge of someone who is lesser in rank than he is, because he is high in knowledge than he is. This is how we used to be, that we used to coordinate with each other when it came to understanding the Quran and Sunnah, and we used to support each other, and we used to collaborate with each other, and there was no such thing as backstabbing each other when it came to knowledge and so on. So this in itself is a sign that Sa'id ibn Musayyib rahimahullah had tremendous knowledge. He says in one of his quotes that if someone does not refine his behavior with regards to Allah's commands and his prohibitions, okay, then he is far away from adab. Kana min al-adabi fi azlatin, that he is very far removed from adab, and he has no share in the adab of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam or the Sahaba. So there you see that the early Muslims really emphasized that you had to be part of this framework called adab. Adab at every level. Adab at the level of akhlaq, adab at the level of ma'amalat and dealings and transactions, adab at the level of ibadat, and adab at the level of knowledge, and adab at the level of aqaid and everything else. And this is all about the ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which is what brings us to the next statement. Okay, the next statement is a bit controversial in the sense that we are not sure whether it came directly from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam or it came from somebody else. And this is why Imam Qushayri says waruya, that it has been narrated, okay, meaning that he is not sure that it is a narration of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but it just might as well be a statement of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because the statement itself is prophetic. Yeah, so sometimes people look at the sanad and they discard what has been said. Or the sanad of this hadith is first of all weak. Well, the adab of weak hadith is that you must accept it first, and then you talk about it later, talk about the sanad later. You don't discard a weak hadith because the sanad is weak. That is not the adab of the muhaddithun. They never said that, nor did they practice this nonsensical approach to hadith, which is very childish and naive today. Somebody says in some book that this hadith is da'if, then you discard it. No. So the adab of the muhaddithun and the scholars who narrated hadith, and the adab of the sharihun, the people who commentated on the hadith, they did not blot out any hadith that was assumed to be weak or da'if. So why did the ummah not go through this process of saying, just blot out every weak hadith that we have on the planet, and that's the end of the story. Just edit it. And have a revised edition every year and take out this weak hadith and this weak hadith. They didn't do that, but first of all, because it would be academic dishonesty. So if Imam Tirmidhi, Ibn Majah, Abu Dawud, if they brought one or two weak hadith in their narration, then the scholars of hadith didn't say, let's edit this and take out the weak hadith, because that is academic distortion. Because that's not Imam Tirmidhi's work, nor is it Ibn Majah's work, nor is it Abu Dawud's work. Then it is your work. Then you write a book and you name it after yourself, instead of saying this is a commentary on Tirmidhi, Abu Dawud, Ibn Majah. So first and foremost, there's this adab there, the adab refinement in acknowledging that this is what the person wrote. And you must have academic honesty, integrity when you're reporting and narrating someone else's statement. This is the adab. And we don't bring that kind of childish emotion into the discussion. Now, when it comes to understanding whether or not the hadith is weak, it has to do with the chain of narrators. It has nothing to do with the matan, meaning the quote itself. Okay? So they're not discarding the quote, they're saying that there's something wrong with the chain of narrators, and that is something which is debated and debated and debated. And that is for the scholar of hadith to do. It is not for the layperson on the streets to say, this book says that this book says that this hadith is weak. Okay? That's not the layperson's domain. Anyway, so what I'm saying is that Imam Qushayri observes the ritual adab of saying ruwiya. Since this chapter to adab, I'm showing you the adab that Imam Qushayri has with regards to his own knowledge. So he says ruwiya, it has been narrated. And usually when people use this kind of term and language, and they use what we call the majhul form, the passive form, it usually means that there is a contention about whether or not the statement is genuinely narrated from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam or not. So he brings this into the discussion first, that this is a statement. It could be from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and it could not be. أنه قال إن الله أدبني فأحسن تأديبي is a very famous quote and dictum for most scholars anyway, independent of whether or not the Prophet ﷺ said this or not. It is a maxim for all scholars that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala trained and disciplined the Prophet ﷺ, and he perfected his discipline. This is the point, that the Prophet ﷺ was trained and disciplined by none other than Allah himself. Allah is the one who came to correct and then to improve and then to refine all of the Prophet ﷺ's behavior. And this is a sign that he is a prophet, that he is a Nabi, that at every phase of his life as a Nabi, as a prophet, he was always kept in check and balanced, and either that or he was improved upon or he was refined. So if you want to see that the idea of correcting is there in Surah Abasa wa Tawalla, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reprimanded the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam for not giving any attention to the blind man, Abdullah ibn Maktoum radiyallahu anhu, that he came while the Quraysh were there in their private session, this kind of elite club. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not like the idea that he discarded this blind person who is a Muslim in favor of the Quraysh who were not Muslim. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala corrected the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and then to the credit of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he actually narrated the ayah and said, this is what Allah says to me, Abasa wa tawalla. He frowned and he turned away. This is a proof that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is a Nabi, that he is infallible, that he is trustworthy in whatever Allah reveals to him. That's the first point, that the Prophet ﷺ was kept in checks and balances at every point of his life. Another point, another story in the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, where he was corrected or perhaps improved, and that in the story of the captives, the POWs at Badr, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him permission or prerogative to choose through shura and mashwara whatever he chose. He chose to free them based on ransom rather than to execute them. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was going to send an ayah, perhaps saying that he should not free them and he should execute them, to send a message to the Quraysh. Remember, this is the first war that they had with the Quraysh. Anyway, so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed an ayah to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam that, had it not been for that a previous ordinance had been already entered in the books in the heavens, the punishment of Allah was very close to you. And then you have other cases of adab through the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, seerah mubarakah. Wherever he went, he was always kept in checks and balances until he came to the point where he was perfected, and he himself perfected the Sahaba through his teachings and through his adab and so on. The adab of the Sahaba for the Prophet ﷺ is proverbial, and it is beyond our minds to appreciate a kind of adab that they had for him. Nowadays, unfortunately, because some secular minded teachers that are hanging around in the Ummah, they give you a sense, oh, the Prophet was just a man, he was a human being like us. Okay? That's not the sense we get from the Sahaba. For the Sahaba, he was everything. As Abu Sufyan himself says, I've never seen a group of people, this is Abu Sufyan talking when he was not a Muslim. I've never seen a group of people so dedicated to their leader, so much so that when he makes wudu, they're crowding around him to pick up the water that drips from his limbs and organs, and then they wash their faces with that dripping water. This doesn't seem to be an ordinary man. This is not the adab of someone who says he was just a man, like us, he made mistakes. Our deen comes from the Sahaba. Our understanding of the deen comes from the Sahaba. As Imam Ghazali rahimahullah quite succinctly put it, that al-Islam ma fahimathu al-ummah, that when you talk about Islam, it is what the ummah, meaning the Sahaba, understood. It's not based on any secular values and is not based on humanism. It is what the ummah understood as Islam. So the adab the Sahaba had for the Prophet is beyond us. There's a story of Anas that the Prophet was sleeping somewhere, maybe in the afternoon, and as the sun is hot and he's perspiring, and as he wakes up, okay, the aunt of Anas radiallahu anhu takes all his sweat Mubarak, perspiration Mubarak from his body and puts it into a container. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is asking, why are you doing this? He says, because your perspiration, it is like perfume. It smells so good, and I want to preserve this. This doesn't seem to be, he's just a human being like us. No, he is the most perfect human being that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created, and that's the end of the story, basically. Anyway, I was saying that this chapter on adab is the beginning, as we saw in the hadith, that the father must give the son adab, and it's also at the end, as we saw in the ayah at the time of Mi'raj, that the Prophet ﷺ has so much adab in front of Allah that he was not distracted even for a second when he was there in the presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So adab is the beginning and adab is the end. And that is why this book of Imam Al-Qushayri is brilliant in its ability to gather and corral all the adab of Taṣawwuf. All the adab of Taṣawwuf are here in this book. And if we have time and the ability to do so, we should read it word for word and benefit from it, inshallah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us all adab, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala raise us with adab, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us, inshallah, entry into the ranks of those who have adab with him and adab with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Ameen ya rabbal alameen. Wa sallallahu ta'ala ala khayr khalqi Muhammadin wa alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in. Bi rahmatika ya arhamar rahimin. Walhamdulillahi rabbil alamin.